So, and I should give the punchline to Dan Caruso, because every governor's best dream is someone who really does love to aggregate, bring different companies together, find synergies. There's a guy named Robert Smith he's got a company called Vista Equity, and he's got a bunch of software companies that he's assembled and are using various synergies to accelerate their respective growth. Though about, I think 9 of those companies now have a significant presence in Colorado. Those are the goals that we're always striving to get. So, what are the possible directions out there that cities can have? And I think, in layman terms, there are cities that accept and embrace the future, and there are those cities that shrink away from the future and try to resist change. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a human characteristic. You know, when our company got sold and we all got laid off, and they laid off everybody in this small independent oil and gas company. This was in 1986, but they did hire an industrial psychologist to come talk to us, and the industrial psychologist said, the one thing you have to remember is all change, even something you want, all change involves loss, and all loss must be mourned. And we sometimes don't take that into account when we look at things like smart cities and the level of innovation that's going to determine which cities embrace the futures and which ones don't. And you know, we just put together a blockchain commission because there's so many people right now that are filled with anxiety because they don't really understand blockchain, and they view it as a threat to a lot of the things that they think are essential and core to life as they know it. And part of the commission's job is, obviously, you get the smartest people around to work on what should the rules and regulations be, how do we begin to be a place where blockchain is not just encouraged but is facilitated. But we also, part of their mandate is going to be to look at how do we distill down in a way that's accessible the elements, exactly what is blockchain and what's it going to look like, what's going to mean to people's lives down the road. And I think that's the future of smart cities. You know, the state has a RoadX program. Don Hunt started, Shailen Bhatt worked on it while he was here. And it's looking at all kinds of making sure we have sensors and communication devices that communicate between the roadbed or the signage and the vehicles to facilitate the interplay of autonomous vehicles and try to make sure that we're out ahead of the rate of change there. Looking at, you know, other places where we can use technology, maybe in training. You think in the next 10 or 15 years between, well, we will probably see an acceleration of not just job loss, but the evaporation of professions. That's going to happen increasingly more rapidly for a certain period of time. Right now, we're not out ahead of it. We understand that there's going to have to be a lot of retraining, but one of the reasons there's so much anger and division in this country right now is that all through the 90s, whether it was outsourcing, whether it was automation, as people lost their careers, they were sent down to the career training center and said, hey, they'll help you write a resume. You know, you might want to look at some of these classes. No one was really trying to think through how to get them started quickly so that they didn't have their entire lives interrupted. And then when they didn't get that quick transition, they were left for dead. They were left behind. If we don't begin right now with an incredible sense of urgency to work on that and begin making sure that we have systems of training whole professions of people and evaluating what skills they've got now, and as people go through their lives, we're going to have to be much more intentional about maintaining, every person taking responsibility and maintaining their own profile of all the skills they're acquiring, what are their competencies, and then as as they may, for whatever reason, need to choose a different profession, they're going to have to be able to, and we need to provide them the technology where they can, at a moment's notice, see in a new profession what skills that they have would be applicable, and where could they get the skills they need, what would it cost, how would they measure their competency. And they're doing that. You know, I was at a school in Paris called 42, and there they had truck drivers. They were learning coding, and they weren't truck drivers. They worked for a trucking firm, but they were the guys who loaded tractor trailers. And you know, the basic stuff is simple. The stuff you put in first comes out last. But you also have to balance the weight. There's a certain topography to loading large tractor trailers. These guys knew that a robot in 5, 6, 7 years is going to be taking their jobs, and they were learning coding because they know they want to be the ones that are the technician or the operator for those robots that are going to eliminate their jobs. So I mean, that's the challenge. We've got to be putting ourselves in a position where these transitions and disruptions are, again, as much as humanly possible, seamless. That's, you know, we have never done that. If you look at the Great Depression, it was another period of incredible an acceleration of innovation again and again and again, and machines did more and more things. You know, electricity in factories meant that you didn't have to have a water wheel to manufacture large amounts of anything. Suddenly you could bring these factories into cities where more people were accessible. This change we're going through is going to dwarf that. And in a large way, cities are going to define, in terms of the training and our how nimble we can be in adjusting to these changes in professions. That's going to define whether we succeed or fail. So smart cities and all that entails. You know, I look at smart cities and it even entails doing politics in a different way and being more less words and more ideas and less manipulation and more outcome, more basic data being used to to achieve outcomes, which unfortunately often isn't the case. Anyway, often this sounds, you know, people, especially after you, like today, you're going to probably, part of you is a little bit terrified, or not terrified, anxious, and part of you is excited. My argument is that you should always be excited, even the parts that seem impossible. I mean, when I started the brew pub back in 1988, I'd never worked in a restaurant. And at that time, I really didn't know much about business. I had to go to the library and take out a book on how to write a business plan. Didn't know what the word pro forma meant. I know that's kind of awkward to admit. And yet, we were determined, and I think this is going to be the key ingredient that's going to allow smart cities to be successful. We were determined to succeed. We wouldn't quit. And when I ran for mayor, and I ran for mayor of Denver in 2003. I was a successful restaurant guy, and I'd never run for student council or dog catcher. And, you know, for the first 6 weeks, I didn't move in the polls a bit. I kept waiting for everyone to embrace me. I was a small business guy. Wouldn't they want an entrepreneur, a successful restaurant? You know, I had started 15 restaurants in historic buildings in downtowns all over the West. Why wouldn't they want me as mayor? And they didn't give a rat's tail. And I used to carry this clipping from the Denver Post about a professor of public speaking at the University of Wyoming. And anytime anyone tells me, well, we can't do this, I explain, this is how I know you can. She was talking to her class about the importance of using opposites when you speak publicly. If you're going to talk about the worst of times, talk about the best of times. If you talk about the agony, talk about the ecstasy. And she asked her class, what is the opposite of despair? And a kid raised her hand and goes, joy? She goes, exactly. If you want people to feel despair, use joy in the same sentence. They get power from being in the same sentence and being close. Then she asked, you know, what's the opposite of woe? And a kid way in the back goes, giddy up. And the bottom line is, and especially as we go through these transitions and we try to really help every city. I mean, the goal here is not just to make Denver the great city, but is to make every town in Colorado is going to have to become a smart city. And many times that's going to seem kind of hopeless. But again, remember that the opposite of woe is to giddy up. Anyway, thank you all for committing your day.
All right, so that wraps up our day. Thank you all so much for coming here. Thank you to the governor and our mayor, all of our speakers. A special shout out to my former boss, Megan, for coming and keynoting for us. Big round of applause for Eric Matisek for emceeing us and bringing us through the day here. And a final shout out to our sponsors, our title sponsor, WeWork. This event is directly in line with their Future of Work initiative and thinking about how we enable the talent of our communities. We're very grateful to Aero Electronics, AECOM, Zayo, and Downtown Denver Partnership. And really thankful for all of you for participating and really going all in on these discussions. We're really excited to have a discussion about smart cities that's not about shiny objects and is instead about investing in people. So thank you all so much for doing that with us. Awesome. Thanks.